I'm standing in my driveway, keys trembling in my hand, about to drive to what I thought would be the most important meeting of my life. The meeting where I'd finally get access to my late husband's inheritance. The money that would save our house, pay for my granddaughter's medical bills, give me back some dignity after 2 years of scraping by on part-time work and food stamps. I never expected that the person who would save my life that day would be someone most people cross the street to avoid. If you've ever felt completely alone in fighting for what's rightfully yours, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, or if you've ever been surprised by kindness from an unexpected source, please hit that subscribe button. Your story matters too, and maybe mine will give you hope that yours isn't over yet. Let me take you back to 3 months earlier, when my husband David died suddenly of a heart attack. We'd been married for 32 years. He was my high school sweetheart, the father of my son Jake, and honestly he handled all our finances. I know that sounds old-fashioned, but David was good with numbers and I trusted him completely. What I didn't know was that David had been keeping secrets. After the funeral, when the grief fog started to lift, I discovered David had a life insurance policy worth $500,000. Plus investments, savings accounts, and the deed to a small rental property his father had left him. On paper, I should have been financially secure for the rest of my life. But there was a problem. Everything was tied up in a trust that David had created 5 years earlier, right after our son Jake married his wife Lisa. The trust named Lisa as the executor, not me. At the time, David explained it was for tax purposes, and to keep things simple if something happened to both of us. I remember feeling a little hurt that he hadn't discussed it with me more, but Lisa was getting her MBA in finance, she seemed responsible, and honestly I didn't think it would matter. I certainly never imagined I'd be widowed at 59. Those first few weeks after David's death, Lisa was wonderful. She brought casseroles, helped with funeral arrangements, assured me that getting access to the inheritance was just paperwork, and would be resolved quickly. She said she was meeting with lawyers and accountants, that everything was moving along smoothly. But months passed. Every time I called, there was another delay. The lawyers need more documentation. There's a tax issue that needs resolving. The investment accounts are complicated to transfer. Meanwhile, I was drowning. David's medical bills from his final hospital stay were enormous. Our house had 2 mortgages. Without his income, I couldn't make the payments. I took a job at a grocery store, but at part-time minimum wage it barely covered groceries, let alone a mortgage. My granddaughter Emma, Jake and Lisa's 5-year-old, had been born with a rare genetic condition that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. I'd been helping with those costs before David died. And now Jake was struggling too, working double shifts just to pay for Emma's medications. The cruel irony was that the money to solve all these problems was sitting right there, in accounts that legally belonged to me, controlled by someone I'd welcomed into our family as a daughter. By month 6 I was getting desperate. I'd been served with foreclosure papers. I hadn't been able to help with Emma's medical expenses, and Jake was talking about taking out loans against his own house. I started pressing Lisa harder for answers. That's when her tone began to change. "Mom Margaret," she said during one phone call, her voice taking on a condescending edge I'd never heard before. "You have to understand, David set this up the way he did for good reasons. These accounts are complex. I'm doing everything I can, but rushing could create problems that would cost everyone money. I asked to see documentation, to meet with the lawyers myself. She said that would just complicate things and create unnecessary legal fees. For the first time, a terrible thought crept into my mind. What if she's not trying to help me at all? I hired my own lawyer with money I couldn't afford to spend. That's when I learned the devastating truth. Lisa had legal authority to control the timing of distributions from the trust. She could delay them indefinitely as long as she could claim she was acting in the trust's best interests. And there were provisions that would allow her to make distributions to herself for management fees and expenses. Worse, if I died before receiving the inheritance, a significant portion would pass directly to Jake and Lisa as secondary beneficiaries. My lawyer was blunt. "Mrs. Chun, I think your daughter-in-law is hoping you'll die before you can access this money. At minimum, she's in no hurry to help you. And every month this drags on benefits her financially while costing you everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. This woman I'd loved, who called me Mom, who I'd trusted with my granddaughter, who I defended when Jake's friend said she seemed calculating. She was basically waiting for me to die. I confronted Jake, but Lisa had gotten to him first. She'd convinced him I was being irresponsible with money, that I was pressuring her, that the delays were necessary and I was being ungrateful for all her hard work managing the trust. My own son chose to believe her over me. The isolation was crushing. I'd lost my husband, my home was being foreclosed on, my son thought I was the problem, and the person who had all the power to help me was slowly, methodically destroying my life. 8 months after David died, I was living in a studio apartment above a used bookstore, working 2 part-time jobs, and hadn't been able to see Emma in weeks because Lisa said my negativity was stressing the child. But my lawyer had been working behind the scenes. He'd found irregularities in how Lisa was managing the trust. She'd been paying herself excessive fees, making questionable investment decisions, and there was evidence she'd been intentionally delaying distributions. We finally had grounds to challenge her authority in court. He arranged a meeting with Lisa, her lawyer, and the bank that held the trust accounts. The plan was to present evidence of her misconduct and demand immediate distribution of the funds. My lawyer was confident we could not only get my inheritance but also have Lisa removed as executor. This brings me to that morning standing in my driveway, about to drive to the most important meeting of my life. I'd barely slept. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say. I'd even picked out the nicest outfit I still owned. A navy blue dress David had bought me for our anniversary 2 years earlier. I felt like a warrior preparing for battle, finally ready to reclaim my life. I got in my car, put the key in the ignition, and that's when I heard shouting. "Ma'am! Ma'am! Don't start that car!" I looked up to see a homeless man running toward my car, waving his arms frantically. I'd seen him around the neighborhood before, thin, probably in his 60s, usually pushing a shopping cart full of bottles and cans. I'd given him money a few times when I could afford it, but we'd never really talked. My first instinct was fear. Why was he running toward my car? What did he want? "Please," he said, slightly out of breath as he reached my driver's side window. "Don't start your car. Something's wrong with it." "What do you mean?" I asked, rolling down the window just a few inches. "I was collecting bottles behind the building across the street around 5 this morning," he said. "I saw a woman messing with your car. Young woman, blonde hair. She was under the hood for maybe 10 minutes, then she did something near the wheels. It didn't look right." My blood ran cold. Lisa had blonde hair. Lisa knew where I lived. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Ma'am, I've been homeless for 12 years. You learn to notice things that don't fit. That woman, she kept looking around like she didn't want to be seen, and she had keys to get into the parking area. So it wasn't like she was stealing anything. But what she was doing didn't look like fixing something. It looked like breaking something." I called my lawyer and told him what the homeless man had said. He told me to call the police immediately and have them inspect the car before I moved it. The police found that my brake lines had been nearly severed. The mechanic who came with them said that if I'd driven to the highway, my brakes would have failed completely. At the speed I typically drove to downtown meetings, it would almost certainly have been fatal. They also found a small explosive device attached to the ignition system. It was crude, but according to the bomb squad, it would have detonated when I started the car. Lisa had literally tried to kill me. When the police arrested her 6 hours later, they found evidence on her phone of research into car tampering methods and insurance policies that would pay out if I died before the trust distribution. They also found that she'd been embezzling from the trust for months, using the money to pay off her own credit cards and fund a lifestyle that Jake knew nothing about. The homeless man who saved my life was named Robert. I learned later that he'd been a mechanical engineer before addiction and mental illness cost him his job, his family, and eventually his home. He'd recognized immediately that what Lisa was doing wasn't maintenance, it was sabotage. At the police station, Robert was nervous about giving his statement. He kept apologizing for interfering, worried he'd get in trouble for being in the area where he'd seen Lisa tampering with my car. I told him, "Robert, you didn't interfere with anything. You saved my life." That evening, sitting in my tiny apartment, I realized something profound had happened. For 8 months I'd felt completely alone. I'd been betrayed by someone I trusted, abandoned by my son, and systematically stripped of everything I thought I could count on. I'd begun to believe that maybe I was the problem, maybe I was being unreasonable, maybe I deserved what was happening to me. But a man who owned nothing, who had every reason to keep his head down and avoid getting involved, had risked his own safety to protect mine. He didn't know me well. He had no reason to care whether I lived or died. But when he saw something wrong, he acted. Robert's simple act of courage didn't just save my life. It reminded me that I was worth saving. The legal resolution was swift once Lisa was arrested. The trust funds were released to me within 2 weeks. Jake, horrified by what his wife had done, filed for divorce and primary custody of Emma. He apologized tearfully, saying he couldn't understand how he'd been so blind to who Lisa really was. I paid off the foreclosure on my house, caught up on Emma's medical bills, and still had enough left to live comfortably for the rest of my life, exactly as David had intended. But the most important thing I did was help Robert get back on his feet. I paid for him to get treatment, helped him find transitional housing, and eventually assisted him in getting certified to work as a freelance mechanical inspector. He's doing well now, has his own small apartment, and we've become genuine friends. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about what Lisa did, if I think about revenge. The truth is, Lisa destroyed her own life far more effectively than she ever could have destroyed mine. She's facing attempted murder charges, lost her family, lost her freedom, and will spend years in prison. Meanwhile, I'm alive, I have my granddaughter back in my life, and I've reconciled with my son. But what I think about most often is that moment when Robert came running toward my car, shouting for me to stop. In that moment, I learned something that changed how I see the world. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the person you expect. Sometimes it's not the person with the most resources or the highest status or the best connections. Sometimes it's just someone who notices that something is wrong and cares enough to do something about it. Robert had every reason to mind his own business. He was homeless, he was vulnerable. He could have gotten in trouble for being where he was or for bothering people. But when he saw someone in danger, he acted without hesitation. That's the kind of person I want to be. Not the kind who looks the other way when something isn't right, but the kind who speaks up, who gets involved, who takes risks for strangers because it's the right thing to do. I also learned that being betrayed by someone you trust doesn't mean you can't trust anyone. It means you have to pay attention, ask questions, and remember that trust should be earned over time, not given automatically just because someone is family or says the right words. Most importantly, I learned that even when everything feels hopeless, even when it seems like the people who should protect you are the ones hurting you, there are still good people in the world. They might not be the people you expect, they might not look like what you think a hero looks like, but they're there. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, one of them will come running toward your car on the most important morning of your life, shouting for you to stop, willing to risk everything to make sure you're safe. If you're going through something difficult right now, if someone is taking advantage of you, if you feel alone in fighting for what's right, please don't give up. Keep asking questions. Keep pushing for the truth. And stay open to help from unexpected places. Your story isn't over yet. Mine wasn't either, even when I thought it was. And if you see something wrong, if you notice someone who might be in danger, I hope you'll remember Robert. I hope you'll find the courage to get involved, to speak up, to be the unexpected hero in someone else's story. Because you never know, you might be the person who saves someone's life just by caring enough to pay attention. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt betrayed or alone or saved by unexpected kindness, please share this video. Leave a comment about your own experience. Hit that like button to help others find this message when they need it most. We're all in this together. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone.